Shalom once again. Brad Scott, Wild Branch Ministry, in revealed out of the beginning. Let's get right back into the end and the beginning as we left off last time talking about the thorns, if you remember, relating Esau with the thorns and this whole idea of the expression of the other seed, which is against the seed of the woman. And once again, it's not just the scriptures that are revealing this, but Jewish commentators and rabbinical literature, also understanding the scriptures, also see Esau and the Amalekites and so forth, the Hyksos, all as the thorns. And so the Father's given us a picture of these thorns from beginning to end. And we've been discussing several examples of these. That's one of the things that sprung up, if you remember, on the third soil in the parable of the sower. The thorns sprung up and so forth. This was the ramification of Adam when he was cast out of the garden. And this is what all of us face as we wander about the wilderness, if you will, having to fight the thorns and the thistles and the grass of the field and so forth, searching and looking for fruit, if you will, in the field. And so when we go into our New Testament, now that we've talked about in the book of Numbers and the book of Joshua, how when Israel went out into the land, when the wheat went out into the land of Canaan, the Father told them to cast out those enemies of theirs, because if you don't, they will be thorns in your flesh. And so he says that several times. So the standard has already been set. The prophecy has already been made about who the thorns in the flesh are. Now when we get to the New Testament, you realize as we go through the narrative of the New Testament that when Paul, who I'm going to submit to you, used to be a thorn, if you will, before he. Why? Because he persecuted the believers, right? And that's the whole point of the thorns. So Paul, more than anyone else, would probably recognize the whole image of the whole thorn idea. And so when he meets Yeshua on the road to Damascus, and now was blind, and now he sees, and so forth. Now he's going to he's going to go out and speak of the Messiah. He's going to follow the Messiah, just like the Messiah followed his father. So he's keeping the Torah. Is he keeping the traditions of the Jewish scribes and elders? No. He's keeping the Torah. Is he keeping the additions and the subtractions, if you will, that the Jewish leadership made to the Torah? No. No, he's not. See, that's what makes them so mad. That's what his brethren in the flesh, which makes them so mad about Paul, is because he was violating the Jewish traditions and fables and so forth, the things that were added to the Torah, but Paul was still keeping the Torah. If you remember, many times in the book of Acts, Paul is brought up by the Jewish leadership, saying that he's speaking against the laws and customs of Moses. That's what the text says. And Paul every time gets up and defends himself and says, I was doing no such thing. Everything I've done is after the fathers and the Torah and the laws and commandments of my God. Paul defended himself every time he was accused of violating the Torah or the law of Moses. He never did that. And so his worst persecutors, the worst persecutors of Paul, were his own unbelieving brethren in the flesh. And so they were thorns in his side. They were not believers, but they were persecuting him who kept the Torah. And so therefore, if you can bring this up, Kyle, when we get to 2 Corinthians 12, verse 7, here's what it says. Lest I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelations. In other words, the things that the Father has revealed to him now when he took him out into the desert of Arabia, if you will, to teach him, to restore him back to God's ways through the Messiah, not the things that he had been taught. And he says, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of what? Satan. Who is Satan associated with? To surround and destroy life or the fish. To buffet me lest I be exalted above all measure. I'm going to submit to you that the thorn in Paul's flesh has already been revealed to us from the very beginning. That's what the thorn was. And so when we also read in Matthew, which is Matthew 27:29, Yeshua, of the two people presented to the masses, the one who kept his own commandments that he wrote, his enemies, those that did not like what he was doing, they put a crown of thorns, and notice where they put it, on his head. And they mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Yehudim," and so forth. Come on back to me, Kyle. And so I'm going to submit to you that these are already revealed to us from the very beginning. Who these thorns are always going to be those who are against the other seed. They can come in various forms. Some of the models that we are shown is the unbelieving Jewish leadership at his time. But once again, among the Jewish leadership who were honoring them with his lips, Yeshua said, but their hearts are far from me, meaning what? What you're seeing on the outside is one thing, lips, but what's going on the inside is another thing. Remember that image that we've been constantly talking about. So they've been honoring me with the lips, but their hearts are far from me. And so they are demonstratively presenting the evidence or the expression of the other seed, which ultimately is out to destroy Israel. Now, who is Israel once again? Paul said not all of Israel is of Israel. It's always those who are children of God, not children of the flesh. And so they're out to destroy the seed of the woman. Now, just a couple of months ago, the last time I was in Israel was just a couple of weeks ago, but a few months ago, I was doing another tour in Israel, and when I was there, this article came out in the Jerusalem Post. If you can bring that up there, Kyle. I'd like everybody to see this article that was in Jerusalem Post. It's a quote from Sheikh Kamal Khatib, deputy head of the northern faction of the fundamentalist Islamic movement. And here's what he said. Notice his words. If the Germans could not succeed in eliminating the Jewish people in the Holocaust, then neither will the campaign that the Israelis are now perpetrating against millions of Palestinians and billions of Arabs and Muslims succeed. In the beginning, in 1948, we were 450,000 Palestinians. And today, we are 300,000 thorns in their sides and rocks in their chests. Now come on back to me, Kyle. Once again, I don't think it's something to be shoved off to the side, the fact that they recognize themselves as being these thorns. I'm going to submit to you because of a misunderstood religious view of what the two seeds really are in Genesis 3:15. We have come to understand, when I mean we, I mean the dominant religious system in Western religions. We've come to understand that Israel is Jews and Jews is Israel. And that's not true, and that's for another whole program. The Jews, Yehudim, are just one of the tribes of Israel. So Jews are of Israel, but Israel is not Jews, all right? Israel's all 12 tribes and so forth. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of that right now, but because of a misunderstanding of who the seed is, because the world, I'm submit to you, the world does not quite understand who the seed is either. And so the world, if you've ever been to Yad Vashem is the hand of the name and so forth, is the Holocaust Museum in Israel. Any of you listening to me right now that have been through the Holocaust Museum, you know what happens to you, the feelings, the horror that you get when you're walking through that museum. And you see the world at that time led by Hitler, if you will, thinking that because they destroy those who are ethnically Jewish, that they're destroying the seed. Because they misunderstand what the seed of God is all about, and they're focusing on the seed of man. And because they're focusing on the seed of man, which only produces another man, they think by eliminating people who are ethnically Jewish, they can destroy the seed. And so you'll know from the testimony that you see in the Holocaust Museum that they were out to destroy Jews. It did not matter of the faith or status. The point was that they were Jews. That's all they cared about. And you see that testimony when you go through the museum. It did not matter if they were loyal, if they were Jews loyal to Germany. It did not matter if they were Jews who didn't even practice Judaism. They were Buddhist. Or it didn't matter what their faith was. If they were Jews who were Christians, whatever, it didn't matter. It's the fact that they had Jewish last names and they had Jewish blood flowing through their veins that they were destroyed in the Holocaust. And so the good news, of course, is that the true seed is all those who believe, regardless of whether you have a Jewish last name or not. That's what the world failed to see. And that's why they can do that again, and they will not be able to destroy the seed of the woman, because the true seed of the woman is all those who believe. And we are scattered all over the world, and we have all kinds of last names and first names. And God deliberately did that to protect the seed of the woman. Because if you're scattered all over the earth, it's difficult to eliminate the seed of the woman. But if they're all in one place at one time, any military strategist will tell you, if the army we're trying to defeat, if we got them trapped in one place at one time, we got their army defeated. But if you divide and split up and scatter all over the place, then it's actually used to protect Israel. And one day, these scattered people will come back into the land. And when they come back into the land, they're going to drag a whole lot of people like you and me with them, who have been grafted in with them. Because when that tree comes back, all the branches of that tree, whether they're natural branches or grafted in branches, will all come back with the same tree. The tree's not going to be scattered all over the place anymore. It's all going to come back. And so that's another example of the thorns and so forth and the true seed. Now I want to shift gears here a little bit, and I want to talk about some other words that are identified with the wilderness. But these precious things that God has planned for us in the wilderness, knowing that the destiny of man, starting with Adam and Eve, because we all come forth from them, that the destiny of man was to be out in the wilderness now, trying to survive because we disobeyed God, out with the thorns and the thistles and so forth. And thorns and thistles also speaking of very dry places. So I want to give you a few examples of this as we continue to talk about Esau. Kyle, if you bring the next verse up on the screen. In Shemot, that's Exodus, chapter 3, verse 1. It says, "Now Moses kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. He led the flock to the backside of the desert and came to the mountain of God," this would be Sinai, "even Horeb." Now Horeb is from the Hebrew root Chorev. Chorev, which is C-H-O-R-E-V there. It means a desert or a waste place. A desert or a waste place. So Exodus chapter 3 verse 1 says he's going to take them to a desert waste place, the mountain of God. In Exodus chapter 16 verse 1, it says, "And they took their journey from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came into the wilderness of Sin." That word Sin there in Hebrew means a thorn, which is between Elim and Sinai, thorny. Now I want you to see on the screen the relationship between the wilderness of Sin, which is thorn, and Sinai, which means thorny, on the 15th day of the second month after departing out of the land of Egypt. So these words that are traditionally associated with where the Torah is given, Sinai, we say Mount Sinai, but it's actually Sinai, is a thorny place. Come back to me for a minute, Kyle. So here's the picture. The Father already knows that Adam and Eve, because they have turned away from his commandments, are going to be exiled, and now they're going to be struggling out there in the wilderness with thorns and thistles that's going to grow up from before them. But God loves us. He loves his people. And so he knows that we're in darkness. He's a smart God. He knows we're out there in the wilderness places, and he knows that's not where he really wants us to be. He really wants to bring us back into his house. So if he knows that by definition of the fact that we're humans made of flesh and blood and we always fail, we're sinners and we don't keep it, then the idea of us coming back into the light and dwelling in the light so he can receive us is not going to happen. He knows that we on our own cannot get through that those angels and that burning flaming sword. He knows that by our own we are incapable of entering back into his house. So what does he do? He takes his tent and pitches it among us. He goes to where we are, and he always provides a fountain of living waters in a desert place. That will be also the consistent pattern from to the end as well. The Father is a loving God, so he knows we are never going to rise up to go to where he is, that he knows he's going to have to pitch his tent among us. Now remember, in our Words Mean Things series, back a lot of programs ago, we defined what the word grace means. The English word grace is the word charis in the Greek, and it is chen in the Hebrew. Chen, which comes from the root chana, and chanan, which means to pitch a tent. Agriculturally or pictographically, it's a picture of someone pitching a tent. And so when God extends his grace to us in a concrete way, he's saying, I will come and take my house, my tent, which is a mobile house, and I will pitch it, and you will come and be in my tent. You will come into my tent. But he's got to go to where we are. In other words, he's got to put on a tent, if you will. He's going to go to us in order for us to be brought back to him. And so wherever we find ourselves, the Father always provides a way. So right out in the middle, my friends, of a place that means thorny, that is a direct reference to the dry, barren thistles and wilderness that people find themselves in, the Father puts a fountain of living waters. In the case of Mount Sinai, the Torah. The Torah is given in a place called Mount Sinai, but right in the midst of Mount Sinai, he places the Torah on a mountain. Now you remember the picture. The picture is that it starts out on a mountaintop, but by the time Moses gets down to the bottom of the mountain, the picture of the water and the streams and so forth, now we have men dumping stuff into the stream and taking stuff out of the stream. So by the time we get down to the bottom of the mountain, chaos has ensued. If you remember the movie, The Ten Commandments. Most of us get our theology from movies, by the way. But if you remember the movie, Charlton Heston is coming down the mountain where the Torah is given on a mountaintop. The mountaintop meaning of the word. By the time he gets down to the bottom, the masses are already in chaos. They're already partying. They're already doing their own thing. They've already got the calf worship thing going on. They've already changed God's cycles into their own cycles. And the person that represents that kind of attitude toward the commandments of God, Edward G. Robinson says, why are you trying to burden us with 10 commandments? Do you remember the movie? See, that's the attitude of the world, the religious world in particular, about God's commandments. Why are you trying to bring us back to the law of Moses? Why are you trying to burden us with these things? And do you remember what Charlton Heston said? He said, there is no freedom without the commandments. Come back to the mountaintop. There is no freedom without the commandments. So the Father provides a way right out in the middle of a desert wilderness. He provides a fountain of living waters wherever they go. Even when they go, if you remember, when they leave Egypt and they're heading toward, if you will, the promised land, they're thirsty, they need something, they're out in the wilderness, and what does God do to the rock? What did Moses, who represents the Torah, what does he do to the rock so that they'll have water? The Father always provides for them. In Exodus chapter 25, verse 40, the patterns are always shown. It says, and they shall make them after their pattern, which was showed thee on the mount. In Exodus chapter 25, verse 40. Go ahead and bring that up there for a minute, Kyle. If you bring that scripture up there, there you go. When they're building the tabernacle, when they're getting ready to build the tabernacle, remember he tells them to bring all their stuff together as their heart wills them to do. Remember Exodus 25:1 starts out with, bring them according to the willingness of your heart. In other words, their heart's led. Now that I've saved you and I've delivered you out of Egypt, planted the seed, now your heart will guide you because you've got the seed in it. And so they did what God told them to do because they had it in their heart to do so. And so they did, and they brought all their materials in gold and brought them together in order to make the tabernacle. And he says to make the tabernacle after their pattern, which was showed thee on the mount. So the pattern for the tabernacle was showed them in the midst of a place called Thorny. He shows them the sun, because the word for pattern there in Exodus 25:40 is tavnitz. See the English word pattern. In Hebrew that is tavnitz. Tavnitz. Now, the heart of the word, the root of the word tavnit is ben, sun. Sun. Because the son is supposed to be after the pattern of the father. And so the word here is the son. Look to see that you make this tabernacle after the son. See, the tabernacle is supposed to be a picture of the Messiah and his body. Not just the head, but his body. And so it's translated as pattern in the English, but the root is the son. So right in the middle of the mount where they found themselves, come on back to me, Kyle, right in the middle of a thorny place that they found themselves, the Father puts the Torah and the pattern of the Torah, which is what they're going to make the tabernacle after, is the Son. The reality, my friends, is that Messiah is the Torah and the Torah is the Messiah. We keep trying to make the Messiah over here and the Torah over there. So therefore we have two major religions in the world. One receives the Messiah and rejects the Torah. The other one accepts the Torah and rejects the Messiah. When the Father's desperately trying to tell us that it's a matter of which one comes first. Not one or the other. One or the other is Greek thinking. That's that either or thinking process that we talked about before. It's either the Messiah or the Torah. You choose. When I go to my religious brethren in America, and I'm wearing my tzitzit and I'm observing the commandments of God and so forth, they lay that proposition before me. Brad, you need to either choose between the Torah or Jesus, one of the two. You can't have both. Choose the Torah or choose Jesus, one of the two. And then when I go to Israel, among the Israelis there, and I obey God in the same way over there as I do over here, they tell me the same thing. You either need to do this Jesus thing or do the Torah. You can't do both. I'm getting the same message from both sides of this Greek thinking process. When the reality is that the Word of God, the Torah, became flesh and dwelt among us, and you and I are grafted into the Torah. So it's not a matter of one or the other. Now, continuing this idea of the tares and so forth, now we're going to get into a slightly different subject, but it's related to things that are worthless, and that is in Matthew 3:12. Bring that up for me, Kyle. Matthew 3:12. Yeshua is before the threshing floor. And he says, whose fan is in his hand, and he will thoroughly purge his floor and gather his wheat into the garner or the barn, and he will burn up the chaff with unquenchable fire. Now this word chaff in the English, which is motz in the Hebrew, motz. This is a picture not of the separating of the wheat and the tares. This is not what's happening here. This is the separating of the wheat from the chaff. Chaff is not a tare. Chaff is not a tare. Chaff is something that's produced by wheat. It's the worthless part of the wheat. So wheats, the Father, come on back to me, Kyle. The Father knows that us, his people, the wheat, sometimes are not very effective at producing fruit, but we still are indeed wheat. Okay? We have some fruit, but then we have a lot of chaff mixed among us. And it's not that chaff that's going to enter into the kingdom. So there will be a burning away of that in the latter days to separate the wheat from the chaff. So the chaff is something that the wheat, I believe, is infected by being around the tares. So I think it is the presence of the tares among us all the time, you can just see that as the world system as well, that causes us as wheat to stumble, and we don't do things right all the time, and we're still doing things that are right. So those of us who are wheat, we do produce some chaff. It's not 100% tares or 100% wheat. There's a little bit of good that the tares do, and the wheat sometimes do things that are wrong. But by wheat, we should always, if you will, go back to the very nature of what we are and so forth. And I think this is an important thing to grasp, too, as to who we are in the Messiah. So there's a difference between the tares and the chaff that the wheat produces. Either way, in the end of times, there will be no chaff and there will be no tares. In the end of times, there will just be the wheat. So next time we're going to continue with this idea of the wheat and the tares and the chaff. And I'm going to give you some quotes, some of the quotes from the rabbis as to how they understood the whole life of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and their relationship that they had with the chaff and the tares and so forth. Because they're going to see the exact same thing. And there's some very interesting prophetic statements that they understand through these agricultural principles as well. So, on our next program, we'll continue with this. So in the meantime, cling to your roots that your days may be long and that you will prosper in everything you set your hands to do. We'll see you next time. Once again, Shalom Aleichem.